Night pooled like ink between the basalt teeth of Dragonstone. The sea hissed and worried at the lost steps of kings, and the wind threaded the high halls with a thin, fretful sound, as if the castle itself were sleepless. Salt dampened the tapestries. Candles guttered in their brackets. Far below, the smell of smoke crawled up the cliff like a living thing. Jon rowed across from the mainland on a small, quick galley that fought the tide and slid beneath the grim mouth of the pier cave. He had not slept. The oarsmen kept their eyes on the blades and avoided looking at the man who could be king and would not be. Their breathing rose and fell in the dark belly of the ship. The surf took the rhythm, and his heart tried to take it too, to marry itself to something simple. He climbed the wet steps with Davos at his shoulder and found the courtyard full of unsullied torches, a river of light around a hard, still stone. Tyrion was waiting with a face that had forgotten how to say anything except "I am sorry." "It's begun," the dwarf told him softly, and led him toward the strand. "They have him already?" Davos asked, voice low from habit. "They have him," Tyrion said. "He did not run. He wrote." They went together. The smell grew stronger, heavy, sweet, wrong. The night pulled tight as a hood and then opened, and there was the circle of spears, and in the center a man who had the gift of knowing when to put on fear and when to take it off. Varys lifted his bald head when Jon stepped near, and in his eyes there was something like relief. "Your Grace," the eunuch said, because he had always been brave with words, "I pray you will do what is best for the realm." Jon's name vanished in the surf. He looked at Daenerys instead. She stood poised as a knife on the edge of a decision she had made hours ago and could not make again. Her hair hung loose and black. The wind made it a banner and then laid it down, a hand too tender for the thing it stroked. She didn't look at Jon. She didn't look anywhere except forward, as if forward were a cliff and the drop would be peace. Dracarys. The night breathed fire and turned a man into a shadow. The shadow wavered, brightened, collapsed. Ash rose like snow and then was nothing. No one moved. Davos bowed his head. Tyrion's breath caught on his teeth and came out in pieces. Jon watched the flame and felt heat bite his face until his eyes watered and blurred the world. When the fires guttered, the smell lingered, and the wind took it as the sea takes spilled blood. Daenerys turned away with the absence of motion that is not mercy and not cruelty, only survival. She walked back toward the castle with Grey Worm beside her like a column of iron and the rest falling behind. "Get some rest," Tyrion said, because that was what men said when they had nothing else and were too wise to try. "She will need you." Jon looked at him, the dwarf who had wagered everything on cleverness and found cleverness a poor raft in a storm, and said nothing. He followed the column. The hall of the painted table was colder than the courtyard. Wind prowled there, too. There was nowhere in Dragonstone that it could not slip through a seam and make itself known. The table glowed with centuries of hands and the heat of tyrants and saviors alike. Westeros lay under Daenerys' palm, a continent of cedar and wax, and her shadow fell across the neck and onto the north that had not asked for this. She stood alone for a heartbeat, as if waiting for something that should have come already. A letter of comfort, a dream of a place where the dead had not been slain and the living had not been burned. When Jon entered, she lifted her gaze and found him as if she had expected him to come and had wished that he would not. "I told them to ring the bells," Tyrion said from near the hearth, seeking mercy in the promise that would let him sleep. "When they surrender, you can accept it," she finished without turning to him. The word had two lives in her mouth, acceptance as an arm held out and acceptance as a blade set aside. "The city will surrender or it will burn. Both are mercy. One is quicker." "It doesn't have to be fire," Jon said, and his own voice surprised him because it had weight that did not tremble. He walked closer, and Grey Worm measured him with his eyes and then shifted his spear a hair's breadth, an allowance that meant everything. "You have every right to justice. You'll have it. But it doesn't have to be fire." "What does it have to be, then?" She turned the full cold of her grief on him. Hunger hollowed her eyes. Sleeplessness frayed the corners of her mouth. Yet there was iron in her that had never needed food, or rest, or love? What do they understand? These lords who laugh in their halls and count my scars. What do the bells say to them, except that a wolf has a better name for king than a dragon has for queen? They say surrender. Tyrion tried again, but she brushed the word aside, not unkindly, only as one bends a reed. Varys wrote his letters, she said. He told the realm the truth I told you with love. They will choose him. She didn't speak Jon's other name, the one that had woken all the old gods and none of them at once. Because he is a song about fields and snow, and I am a story about fire that they tell to frighten their children. Jon had thought he had made all his choices already, on a battlefield where breath had come in icy knives, under a godless sky where the dead had asked to be forgiven and had not been. But a man could always choose again. That was the ache of living. I won't let them choose me. He said it, and the hall changed shape, or he did. The wind did not sound the same. I won't let them set me between you and your throne and then claim they had clean hands. I will stand where you need me, and if that is before you, then they will see my back. She watched him, and there was no triumph in her face, only a terrible carefulness, the way a starving creature watches food set out in a trap. Words, Jon Snow. More than words. He did not kneel. He had not yet earned the right to kneel. Tomorrow, before the walls, in the sight of every company and every banner, I will offer the Iron Throne to you. I will name you Queen of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men. I will name you the one I follow and the one I fight for. I will speak my name and then set it down in the dirt and put my sword on it for you to step on when you walk past. And after that, I will go into the city and take the bells with my own hands if I have to. And when they ring, we will not kill those who yielded. Grey Worm's mouth tightened, a memory of a head falling from a wall. Tyrion breathed once, like a man who had been freed from a noose and had not yet noticed the rope still in his hand. You will go into the city? Daenerys asked, and her voice had changed too. It was not softer. He had not earned soft, but the iron in it had turned toward him instead of through him. You will set yourself where crossbows can find you, where men will call you their king while they shake your hand, and then cut your hand off? For me, for the realm. He stepped closer to the table. The painted rivers gleamed under candlelight. For the people in there. He put his finger on a slice of carved wood that was not a place so much as 1,000 lives layered until they were too thick to see through. Because I said I would protect them, and because I want to keep my word. You can burn the Red Keep once everyone is out of it. You can burn the Iron Fleet. You can burn the Scorpions. Give me the streets. Her head dipped, just a fraction, as if something heavy had been brought out of her and set down very gently at her feet. And when it is done, and the bells have sung me mercy, will you still give me what you say you will? He did not look away. Yes. She reached out, and for a moment he thought she would touch him, and he did not know if he would step back or forward. But she touched the table instead, the painted teeth of the mountains of the moon. All my life, she said, and it sounded less like an oath than a map. Men have offered me things that were already mine. They offered me rape and called it marriage. They offered me murder and called it justice. They offered me ashes and called it peace. I will take what is mine. But if you say you will set me on the throne, I will hold to the bells and teach my soldiers to hold with me. Grey Worm shifted again. My queen, he said, and the title was a song that had survived chains and salt and grief. The men who killed Missandei will be in the city. Some will lay down their swords when they hear the bells. Some will not. Then we kill those who do not, Jon said, and we take the others alive. We do not make new enemies from old prisoners. The Queen of Dragons stood over a carved land and turned the idea in her hands. If I end the lions and leave the cubs, she said. The cubs grow teeth, but there is a difference between a cub and a rat. Very well. We will hold when the bells ring. Tell me how you will take them. I know a way in, Davos said, stepping out of habit's shadow. Used to smuggle things to and fro when King Robert sat and drank and forgot to count his casks. The tunnels are old, aye, but stone stays stone. I can put you into the city where the smell is worse than any battlefield, and fewer arrows know it. Not you, Jon told Daenerys, and earned the flint dark look she kept for men who underestimated her. "You'll be in the sky, destroying the scorpions and the fleet. If they can't put shafts in you, they can't hold the city." Drogon's voice shuddered the walls as if he had heard his name and approved. Somewhere, far below, the dragon shifted in his black nest, cracked claws on black stone, and exhaled a gust of air that smelled of storm and furnace. Daenerys nodded once. "We will fly at dawn when the sun is behind us. They will have eyes eastward, and we will be west. Grey Worm, ready the Unsullied. Tell the Dothraki that the horns will sound twice. The first is to advance. The second is to halt." She held the halt like something fragile, and Grey Worm took it in his hands with care and rage at once. Tyrion closed his eyes and swayed. He steadied himself with a hand on the table and looked at Jon. "Jaime is in the city," he said, because he could not keep the treachery in his mouth. "I sent him there, to ring the bells if he could, to take her away. I may be the greatest fool that Westeros ever produced." "You may be," Jon said, "but not because you want less blood." He turned to Daenerys. "If Jaime Lannister is there, he can open doors. He knows the keep. If he reaches Cersei, it could end without fire at all." "Tyrion," Daenerys said evenly, "if your brother leaves by the sea, he will leave over the ship that took my dragon and the man who thinks his beard makes him a god. I will break that god and his ships and any man who sailed with him. If your brother meets me covered in ash with blood on his hands, I will burn him. If he comes with a white flag and a queen who will kneel, I will take them both alive." She grew very quiet. "And after, we will discuss your loyalty." Tyrion bent his head like a penitent before a stern septa. "After," he said. There were no more words that helped. They scattered to their work. The castle moved, as a beast that had slept in the stone began to shift and wake. Jon found Arya in a corridor where wind had learned to sing his name at the corners and could not forget. She was a shadow there, the sort of shadow that had teeth. "You're going," she said, because she always knew before others did. "Into the city, where she is. Where the people are," he said. He didn't reach for her. She didn't like hands she didn't choose. "I can't keep you from it, can I? You've never been able to keep me from anything I liked," she said, and it was almost a smile. Then her eyes changed. "I don't go for you, Jon. I don't go for her. I go for me." He nodded. He loved her. There was nothing simple about it and nothing complicated. "We need you to help Davos get to the Belfry." "I know the tower," she said, and it was not a boast. It was a memory more permanent than some men's oaths. "I climbed it when I was little. The steps are narrow, and the last stretch is a ladder. If your fat knights come, they'll pant and get stuck." "I won't." "The Hound?" Jon asked. "He'll come." She tilted her head. "He hates it there more than anyone. That's why he goes. Some people like to walk straight at what they hate, to get it over with." "Tell him," Jon said. "I won't order him. He only listens to orders he gives himself." They left the corridor the way two soldiers leave a church, without looking back because what was there was going with them anyway. The morning came iron gray and reluctant, a coin the sky did not wish to spend. Dawn stitched light along the sea's edge. Daenerys stood in the saddle Drogon made of his neck and shoulders, a small figure with a cloak that became a wing when the wind caught it. Unsullied moved below like lines drawn by a master. The Dothraki were a dark music at the edge of the world, and the northern banners held the wind as if it were theirs by old right. Jon had not slept, but when he stood before the host, the weight that he carried had become something he could lay down in a particular place. He took Ghost's scarred head in his hands and pressed his brow to it. The direwolf huffed warm breath across his face and bared his teeth at nothing. Davos put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed once, then let go. He walked out in front of the ranks until there was no shadow anywhere near him. The walls of King's Landing were a taut line ahead, and the men on them were iron thorns. The Golden Company stood in mirror rows outside the gate, precise, polished, a thing made to be seen. Someone somewhere beat a drum with a flat, steady hand. Jean drew long claw and held it upright until the blade took the gray light and made it something brighter. He turned in a slow circle so that every face around could see his mouth. His voice carried in the cloudy morning, not from volume but because men had trained themselves to hear it. "You know my name," he said. "You know names I never asked for, and names I didn't earn. I was born in the wrong bed to the wrong song, and I lived when better men died. I won a crown that I gave away, and I've been told I have another because of something done before I ever breathed. I tell you now, I do not want it. I will not have it. I will not be set between this woman and the thing she crossed the world to take. Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen is my queen." He turned to her where she rose above all on the dragon's black back, and the wind pulled his hair into his eyes, and he didn't blink. "Hear me. I offer you the Iron Throne, and I will put you on it with my own hands. When the bells ring, we hold. When the city yields, we spare. Follow me." His sword fell, point first, into the wet soil with a sound that no one heard and everyone felt. He stepped back, and the words he had said became a place in the world that had not existed the moment before. Grey Worm looked to Daenerys. She did not nod. She did not need to. She lifted her hand, and Drogon unfurled like night itself, discovering it had a body. He took the sky with a crack of wing that buffeted banners and bent men, and the long scream that came from his throat made the walls shake and the hearts upon them falter. Jon went down into the earth. Davos had them into the tunnel with fisher's ease, 3 men behind, 3 ahead. The smell rose thick from the stones and laid itself over their tongues. The torch painted slime and bricks the color of old liver. Arya moved ahead without sound or shape, a piece of deeper dark that knew where it was going. Above ground, the Iron Fleet lay like a swarm of black beetles on the green water, and Euron Greyjoy stood on his prow with triumph carved into his beard. He had his eyes eastward. Drogon came from the west with wind under him and light behind him. The first volley of scorpion bolts went high and then low and then nowhere. Fire bloomed on the nearest ship as if a second sun had been dropped into it and could not be held. The wood curled like fingers, men leaped as woven baskets on their bodies went up like candles, and the sea ate them. Euron ducked and roared and grinned, and then his grin withered as bolts snapped and fell before they found what they had been built for. On the walls, men bled courage. They tried to crank and load and lift, hands burn-blistered, while a beast moved across their line like a storm that had been taught to hate geometry. Fire licked along the crenels and took the oiled ropes in an instant. The Golden Company looked up once as the ballistae died and then tried to keep their eyes on their work as if work were a sacrament that might save them. Inside the belly of the city, Arya reached the bottom of the belfry ladder without trouble and looked back for a heartbeat. Jon's face below her was fixed and closed. He had that look when he lifted a sword he didn't want to use. Davos wheezed quietly and made it sound like a blessing. Sandor Clegane came last, swearing under his breath because ladders were made by men who never expected to meet a mountain halfway up. "Go," he told her. "I'll see your feet don't get cut off." She climbed. The ladder shook. Dust fell. The first man with a halberd came out onto the landing with a yell he probably hoped would be his epitaph someday. She took the yell in hand and broke it. The second man's death was more work. She did not look at their faces afterward. There was no afterward. The ladder ran out, and she was in the belfry with a great iron tongue that had not spoken much since another sept had been blown into empty air. Below, the gate held. The men inside cried orders that contradicted one another, and the men outside waited to see whether they would be asked to die. The Dothraki's horses stamped and breathed ghosts in the cold. The Unsullied held steady as if steadiness were a religion. Northern pikes shifted, not from fear or hurry, only because men with pikes shift sometimes to remember their bodies. "Now," Arya said, and took the rope in both hands. She pulled with her whole weight. Bellmetal is stubborn. It resisted as if it had principles, as if it had chosen silence and did not mean to be bullied out of it. She braced a foot on the stone rim and leaned. The rope scraped her palms raw. Then, very slowly, the world above the city gathered itself and spoke. The bell began like a cough from a giant with old lungs. It found a better voice and rolled it down over rooftops and into alleys where people had hidden their children under tables. The second note came and met it, and somewhere the narrow place between them filled with hope. The sound climbed the walls and looked the soldiers in the eyes and told them it was not their day to be legends. It crossed the Blackwater and drew a line through the smoke and flame. On the line outside the gate, spears dropped point first in the mud. The Golden Company's captain stood very tall and very still, and then almost imperceptibly slumped, as a flag wilts when the wind that loved it goes away. In 1,000 places at once, swords clanged, the sound that men make when they want to live. Grey Worm's spear flexed under his hand until the shaft creaked. He threw it once in his mind at a man kneeling. He had to drag it back out of the man's throat 3 times before his fingers could trust the wood again. The horn blew twice. It sounded like a promise kept at great cost. Daenerys held the sky. She hovered above. The Red Keep and Drogon's wingbeats shuddered in her bones. The city bowed to her in 1,000 invisible ways. If she tilted her head, she could see Missandei's face again, asking one last word of the world and saying the one they had taught her. It came to Daenerys now unbidden. Dracarys, the name of the only mercy some men understand. She could turn, and in turning end something that had festered since the day her brother told her he would give her to a man with 50,000 horses if it bought him 3 ships. She had lost and lost and lost. She had been told she was mad when she asked not to be betrayed. If she burned, the fear would be pure and the obedience clean. She would never be loved in a language she understood, but she would be obeyed. Jon stood in the square beneath the belfry, his face turned up to the red sky where smoke thinned and thinned. He did not call to her. He did not lift his hand. He lowered Longclaw and sheathed it, as if he were a man who had finished one kind of work and was waiting to begin another. She looked down and found the place he had made with his words, the spot in the world where she could set something that would not break. She closed her eyes once, not to hide tears or to show that she could. She opened them again, and the Red Keep was exactly where it had always been, which was both the comfort and the problem. Down, she told Drogon, and he went, because he would have flown into the sea if she had told him to and boiled it to steam to see if she liked the sound. They landed in the great courtyard like the memory of a thunderclap. Men fell back and then forward again because curiosity is the bravest thing in the world. Unsullied poured in through the smashed gate, halting with that violence of obedience that looks like a held breath at the end of a sob. The Dothraki's horses shied and stilled. Northern men peered from under their helms with their plain faces and their old oaths. Qyburn came in a flutter of brown like a moth that had got into a church. He had the nerve to put a hand up in a gesture that belonged to saints and fools. "Your Grace," he said, and meant the wrong person by it, which showed his cleverness had limits. "There is no need for." A shadow stepped past him, and his mouth cut off with a wet sound. The mountain stood behind him, enormous and himself and something else, and when the hound saw him from the foot of a stair, he smiled with half his face. "Brother," he said, "I've walked a long way for you. Let them be." Daenerys said to no one in particular and everyone at once. The hound didn't need permission. He was already climbing, and Arya ghosted after him and then stopped because she had seen the bell swing and knew she had rung it, and a child in a doorway below staring upward with white knuckles and a mother's hand about his throat. The mother's knuckles were white too. Arya turned and went toward them as the brothers began their last, inevitable work behind her. Jaime Lannister found Jon Snow near the base of the tower and looked older than either man had any right to. Blood crusted along his sleeve where an elbow met gold. His hair was damp. He had the sea's smell on him. Jon drew breath to curse Tyrion and decided to wait. "She's in the tower," Jaime said without preface. He looked up past the banners that hung limp and blackened. "She won't kneel. She thinks the stones will stand because they always have. Will she come down for you?" Jon kept his voice flat. If Jaime had thought to sell a parley, this was the time he'd try. Jaime smiled in that way that made him handsomer than he deserved. "I used to be her dream of a night. Now I'm a story about ruin she tells herself when she can't sleep. But she'll listen long enough to hate me. If you want her alive, give me a circle free of swords and the promise that the dragon won't melt us where we stand. I'll bring her out, or I'll die trying, which is the same thing with less noise." Jon looked to Daenerys. She watched the tower as if she could see up through the stones and into the room where another queen paced and made a life into a cage. "Alive," she said. It was the hardest thing she had said that day. "Bring her to me." Jaime went. He walked like a man whose body remembered how and whose heart didn't see the point. The mountain and the hound crashed together somewhere that echoed like a collapsed temple. Dust fell in curtains. Men coughed and ran. Arya carried a child under one arm, and then a second, and then an old woman who could not run fast enough on her bad leg. She did not look back. Looking back is for poets and men who don't know how much the world weighs. Jon stood with his hands clenched on nothing. He had never been good at waiting. He had been made for it, and he had never been good at it. Davos drifted to his side and said very softly, "If she had wanted to burn them, she would have by now." "I know," Jon said. "No," Davos said, and his mouth twisted. "I'm reminding you so when the fear comes back with its sodden boots, you have something to point at and say, 'There, she did what she said.'" Jaime reappeared a long time and no time later. He had Cersei by the wrist. She was pale and perfect as a carved candle, and her eyes were lanterns that had burned too hot, too long. She held her other hand over her belly, and if it was a shield, it was no better than her walls had been. She saw the dragon first. She saw the woman next. Only then did she see her brother properly. As if the mind fends off terror with familiar shapes like a child in a dark room arranges toys in a ring for comfort. She did not struggle. She would not give anyone the small victory of watching her do it badly. "Your Grace," Jaime said to Daenerys, and there were ghosts in the title. Robert's slurred bark, Joffrey's boyish, brittle sneer, Tommen's strangled, polite whisper, "She will kneel." Cersei looked as if she had tasted something she had thought was sugar and discovered it was bone dust. She sank calmly, effortlessly, as if she had rehearsed it in every private hour and become the world's best actress in a play in which the end was always the same. "Spare the innocent," she said, and then turned her eyes toward Jon like a knife. "If this man is what you say he is, make him prove it." Daenerys came forward. Silence flooded the courtyard. Not a bird moved. If there were gods, they watched. If there were none, the stones did their best. "You burned my child on the water," she said without heat, and Euron's flaming ships cracked and hissed in that voice, and Missandei's head fell again, and a brother lay with a spear in his throat at Meereen's walls and looked at her with surprise. "You burned my friend on the walls. You tried to burn a city and call it holding it. Kneeling does not rise like a tide and wash away what you've put into the world." Cersei's mouth curved, a thing too precise to be a smile. "No, but victory does." "Then you are poor twice," Daenerys said. She looked past Cersei to Jon, and he saw in her face the balance of two futures, one with ash underfoot and one with mud. He did not speak. It was not his moment. "Take her to a cell," Daenerys said at last. "I will try her in the sight of all the lords and commons." Her gaze cut to Qyburn's cooling body without pity. "Find her hand another name. Perhaps it is justice." As Unsullied closed, Jaime released Cersei's wrist as if it had been a chain burning his skin. She did not glance at him. He watched her go with the slow ruin of a man who has lost so much that losing more feels like a strategy. Above, the Hound and his brother were still killing each other. It had become an act of faith. Jon raised his head and watched them for a heartbeat because sometimes a man must witness what the world is willing to do to itself. When the stones gave at last and the two bodies went down into dust and darkness and silence, he put his hand to his breast, where a scar he did not show to anyone pulled tight. He owed Sandor nothing, but he gave him that. The day did not end. Days never do. They fade, with work to be done between the fading and the dark. Dothraki rode down the last of the sellswords who had not understood the bells. Unsullied, by habit and training the most dangerous creatures in the world after dragons, stood in doorways and barred the way to panic. Northern men found casks and broke them not for drink but for water. They poured it on fires that could be put out with water and learned with quick, scorched hands which ones could not. Daenerys mounted again at last and took Drogon up. She circled the city slowly, a crown moving overhead. She did not breathe fire. She did not need to. Her shadow was enough. In the afternoon, when the heat had eaten itself and left a brittle shell behind, they brought Tyrion to her in the Red Keep. The audience chamber smelled of smoke and bat droppings and the perfumes of dead queens. Light fell in spears through arrow slits. "I freed my brother," Tyrion said at once. "I did not do it because I love my family more than yours, but because I am a fool who still believes in exits where there are only doorways to different rooms. If you mean to execute me, do it now. I have had a long day. I would rather you not wait to do me the courtesy." She looked at him with an expression that would have been pity in someone who had not lost so much. "The bells rang," she said. He bowed his head to that like a man before a shrine. "They did. Cersei kneels in a cell. The people live." She walked to the window slit and set her hand on the cold stone. "You failed me. You don't get to be proud in your failure because some other thing went right. But I won't burn you. That's not mercy. That's laziness dressed as justice." She turned. "You're no longer my hand. Take a guard's cloak. Guard the dungeon. Earn my trust back by keeping the woman who would have killed me from growing wings." He stared at her as if she had set the world on a table and asked him which piece he wanted to save. He put a hand to his chest where the hand's brooch had been and fumbled at nothing. "As you command," he said, and it was both smaller and bigger than a man like him should say. They made the dragon pit into a court, because it was the only place in the city big enough to hold both power and those who wanted to look at it. Word went out and grew legs and arms and voices. It ran through market stalls and down narrow stone staircases and across rooftops where children ran to catch it. Lords who had survived war and winter came with their banners stitched back together and their hands empty of food and full of claims. Yara Greyjoy arrived with 3 ships limping but afloat. She smelled of pitch and sea and fury. Gendry came proudly, uncertainly, wearing Storm's End like a tunic that did not yet fit across the shoulders. The North sent men with plain speech and good boots and Sansa Stark's copper hair wrapped in a letter seal. Brienne of Tarth came with a look on her face that told men to mind themselves, and so they did. They brought Cersei out in chains that did not touch the ground. She walked as if the chains were jewels. The people shouted. There were words among the shouting that should have scorched her ears, but she did not flush. Tyrion stood at the edge of the dais, a guard's cloak on his small shoulders, and he watched like a man who had thought himself numb and discovered new kinds of feeling. Daenerys sat the stone bench, not the iron chair. They had not moved the iron throne. It remained in its hall as if the building were a skull and the throne were the memory of a headache. She did not wear a crown. She did not need to. Drogon lay curled along the inner wall, a long curve of black muscle and old fire, and the air tasted of him. "The charges are treason and murder and war against the living," Daenerys said, and the words fell to the sand in the pit and stood there like men. "The evidence is ashes that were once children and the heads of friends. The defense is that this is how it has always been done. I reject the defense." Cersei laughed. It was not a pleasant sound, but it was strong. "Then what defense would you accept? That I was born to do as I pleased because my father's name is loud? That I was afraid? That no one ever told me no? If you seek to make an example of me, do it. I won't sing you a song and hope you like it." The crowd rippled, 1,000 bodies shifting as if a breeze had passed. Of all the stupid aristocracies in the world, courage was the one that never failed to buy attention. "Do you confess?" Daenerys asked. "I don't confess," Cersei said. "Confession is for the weak or the religious. I will say that I did what I did because I could. And more of your sort will do what they do for the same reason until you find a way to make that reason expensive." Daenerys nodded slowly. "Then I sentence you to live long enough to cost your reasons. You will be taken to a place where you cannot breed, you cannot write letters, you cannot bribe or frighten men. You will be given food and water and a bed. You will be given no news but what concerns you, when your child is born, to whom it is given to nurse and how it thrives. If it does not thrive, you will be told that too. You will not die publicly. You will not be made into a martyr. You will be a lesson without a statue. Murmurs rose and tangled above the sand. Mercy, some called it. Cowardice, others hissed. The oddest of them, perhaps the wisest, called it work. Cersei closed her eyes for the first time since stepping out under the sky. When she opened them, they were as bright as coins. "You mean to be loved," she said, and pity threaded the words for a heartbeat. "You will learn to be obeyed instead." "I know how to be feared," Daenerys answered quietly. "I am trying not to need it." She lifted her hand. "Take her." Grey Worm watched as they led her out. He understood a different justice. He held that understanding like a blade whose hilt had grown hot in his hand. He did not drop it. When he looked at Daenerys, he saw the woman who had broken his chains stand on a road that did not lead to the city he expected. He stood on that road with her because he belonged to no road but hers. When the judgment ended and the people still buzzed like a disturbed hive, Jon stood where the heat from Drogon made the air waver and thought how many times men had set a woman and a dragon together in a painting and called it destiny. He felt Davos' hand again and then Sansa's letter, heavier than any hand. He opened it. There were not many words, and none of them were surprised. "You will always do what you think is right," the letter said in his sister's sharp, spare hand. "I cannot make the North love her by telling them to. If she is queen for all the realm, then the North must be what it is. Stubborn, faithful, and free. Tell her I will not bend them. Tell her it is not rebellion. It is honesty. If she is wise, she will count that as something worth having." He found Daenerys on a balcony that had once given a king joy in sunsets and had later given him headaches. The city had become a wound wrapped in bandages. The smell of smoke lingered, but voices had already found their work again. Selling, calling, laughing as if the laughter could be used to fill the gaps where walls had been. She stood with her hands on the stone, as she had at Dragonstone, and the wind tried to take her hair and failed. "The North asks to be free," he said without preface. "Of me or for itself?" She did not turn. The question was calm. Calm cost her. "For itself," he said. At last she looked at him. "And you?" "I belong to more than myself." He moved to the parapet beside her. The Blackwater lay below like dull steel. Seabirds picked at a floating beam. "You asked me once if people loved you or feared you here. I can't promise love. I can promise loyalty. If you allow the North its standing separate, I will see that the Riverlands, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Iron Islands, the Crownlands, and Dorne call you queen and mean it. I will stand for you against them when they forget they mean it." He drew breath. "If you ask me to be your consort, I will say yes. Not to make the North bend. To show them what I chose." She put her head back and closed her eyes as if a strong wind had hit her in the chest and pushed her against the wall. "Once," she murmured, and he almost had to lean in to hear it. "A man told me he loved me and then pulled away when I reached for him. I learned to hate reaching. Now another offers me a crown that is already mine and offers me a man that might be mine and offers me a sacrifice on behalf of a land he loves better than anyone. The wheel is made of offers. You can refuse," he said, and the relief of saying it almost made his knees weak. "You can rule without me. You can make the North kneel. You can keep it. You can burn any city you choose. I will still follow you until you do something I can't follow, and then I will stop, and then you will kill me, and then there will be peace only of a sort. Or you can let them go and get more than you lost." "You speak like a man who has had too many sisters," she said, and there was something like rough humor in it. "I have," he admitted. "It keeps me from thinking the world is waiting for me to decide what it is." She stood very still. He could feel the life in her, tightly held, dangerous as a lamp in a barn. "I will call a council," she said at last. "Not a war council. A council where the realm chooses what it means to be a realm. I will let the men who love their old words speak them. I will say the North may go if it chooses. I will say that the rest may remain if they choose. I will say that I will not hold them by the throat when I could hold them by the hand." She opened her eyes. "If they choose to stay, it will be because they prefer my hand. If they choose to go, it will be because they cannot bear any hand." I will not spend a dragon to teach them that either choice costs them something. He let out a breath he had not admitted he was holding. Thank you. Don't, she said sharply. Don't thank me. I am not doing this to be thanked. I am doing it because I am tired of the taste of burned food and dead children. I am doing it because I could learn to like the sound of bells. They stood together, looking down at a city that did not know yet what it would be tomorrow. The wind came off the sea. It smelled of salt and ash, and also, faintly, of fish and bread and life. The great council gathered not in a single day but in 3, because messengers had to be sent and bridges mended enough to bear the weight of passing soldiers. The dragon pit held them. The lords and ladies and those whose titles had been invented yesterday to cover the space where titles had burned. There had not been a council like it since the dragons went out and the Targaryens turned to marriage for power. This time the dragons sat on the rim and watched, and men spoke as if their words could be cooked before they were eaten. Bran Stark came in a litter and said little but looked at much. Sansa sat with a straight back and a mouth like a blade laid very flat on a table. Arya sat nowhere for long and touched no knives because she did not need to. Brienne stood behind the Starks, and Jaime stood behind no one, which was its own kind of confession. Gendry sat with the Stormlands and sweated. Yara sat with the Ironborn and glared as if the glowering might keep the world in a shape she recognized. The Reach sent a tidy number of tidy men who smelled of lavender and calculation. Dorne sent a woman in orange and gold whose smile shook promises out of men as pockets without their knowing. Daenerys stood. Her dress was black as her dragon, and her hair caught the sun like a stand of wheat. We are here, she said, because kingdoms that don't choose what they are become something they don't like. I can sit a chair because my ancestor conquered the man who sat it before him with 3 dragons and 2 sisters. I can sit it because I am the last of my name who wants it. I can sit it because I have a dragon and you don't. All that is true, but it's not enough. There was a shift among the banners, the movement that comes when men think they might be about to be disappointed and carry their anger in ready packages. I say this, the North will be a kingdom apart under its queen, Sansa Stark. The rest who call themselves the 7 kingdoms will choose to remain 6 or to be 6.5 or to go. And if they go, they will not go with my enemies' names. They will go with mine. They will not be rebels. They will be neighbors. Those who stay will have my protection and my laws. Those who go will have my word that my protection ends where my laws do. If any of you think this is weakness, you have learned the wrong lessons from me. I do not bargain from fear. I bargain because I am tired of killing strangers. Silence followed, not of shock but of thought. It moved around the pit like a slow wind. Jon Royce stood and cleared his throat and asked about falcons and oaths. A Tyrell cousin with roses on his breast asked about taxes and seed. The Dornish woman asked about poison, and everyone laughed as if poison were a joke that could be made by a woman and not a man. Gendry asked to hold Storm's End if the Stormlands stayed, because a man who had once been no one wanted a place to put his name. No one said no. Yara asked whether the Iron Islands could leave. Daenerys said yes, and Yara narrowed her eyes at the yes as if it had hidden barbs. Sansa said nothing. Her face did the work. Jon spoke last, because that was the only way he could speak at all and not be interrupted by men who liked their voices better than their ears. You don't need me to tell you what to do, he said. You've been doing it long enough to die of it. But if you want to know what I will do, I will stay where I am asked to stand. I will kill who needs killing when they won't put down their swords after the bells ring. I will not cut a man's throat because someone else names him an enemy and then turn and say the gods made me do it. If you call Daenerys queen and mean it, I will fight to make your meaning last longer than your hunger. The council ended with no one happy and everyone exhausted, which meant it had gone as well as it could. They crowned Daenerys Targaryen not in the hall with the Iron Throne but under the open sky, because she asked for air and the sight of her creature curled like a benediction. The crown they set upon her was plain and pale, hammered silver, the metal of a moon over a dark sea, and the cheers that rose were not as loud as those for kings who had bought their cheers with festivals and bribes, but they had a steadiness in them that men might remember when storms came. Jon stood at her side and did not flinch. He had learned to stand in cold. He had learned to stand before dead men. Standing beside a queen who had chosen against fire was work he was made for, and work he had not known needed doing until he did it. When it was done, he found her hand and set his on it. She did not look at him. She did not need to. In the days that followed, work multiplied like mice in a grain store. The lists of the dead were written and written again. The healthy were turned to labor. The wounded were turned to tasks they could do sitting. Water was carried and wine with it. Bread baked. Orders were written with the slowness that comes when every word has weight. Grey Worm drilled the unsullied and taught them to hold at a note they had not been raised to hear. And if one spear slipped forward sometimes like an old habit that couldn't be quick enough to die, he went stiller and the line steadied. The Dothraki rode through streets they hated and found they preferred the fields beyond the walls, where grass spoke a language they understood. They smiled more out there. Cersei's child was born on a rainy night when the gutters ran full and the rich did not sleep because thunder reminded them of battering rams. The babe had a mouth like his mother's and hair that was nothing yet. The wet nurse held him as if he were a jug with a crack she could not patch. They did not tell Cersei immediately. They told her in the morning. She said nothing. Tyrion stood at the cell door and listened to the quiet and told himself it was better than others had had from her. The Hound and his brother did not get buried. There were not enough shovels in the city for all the work, and some men had died in places where shovels were useless anyway. Arya went to the spot where stone had fallen and looked down. The dust had made the air sweet in a way that hurts. She turned away and went to find a ship that would take her where the maps stopped being right. Sansa kissed her hair on the dragon pit steps and did not say goodbye, because leaving would make coming back a story rather than a thing that could happen anytime. Jaime asked Brienne to write his page in the book. She did. She wrote the things he would have liked men to know and a few he would have preferred they forgot. When he read it, he said, "That's enough." She looked at him as if no amount of enough would ever be enough for some men, and then she smiled and he smiled back, and it was not happy and it was not sad. It was something grown people do when they have both lived long enough to understand the price of their names. Tyrion guarded and thought and slept and woke and made lists in his head. He could not write down because his hands itched to take up a pen that had been taken from him. Daenerys came to him one evening without attendants and without armor in her voice. "You hate me," she said lightly, "the way a woman tries on a dress she will not buy to see if the color suits." "I don't know," he said. "I wanted to. I tried to. It would make my life easier to have fewer moving parts. But then you didn't do all the things I told myself you would. I am unaccustomed to being wrong in quite that way." "You were wrong before," she said, and he grinned, and she surprised herself by liking the sight of it. "I was," he said frankly, "frequently and with enthusiasm. It was my old faith. I've given it up. There are new gods now." She stood with her hands behind her back and looked at the torchlight crawling over the stones like insects. "I need a hand," she said. "Not the one who tells me I am beautiful in my decisions. The one who makes me say my reasons out loud and then tells me if my reasons are only names dressed in armor. The one who knows when to put the city first and when to put my promise first. If you will do that with me, I will take you back. If you prefer to keep a guard's cloak and peep at justice while it sleeps, I will find another dwarf and tell him he reminds me of you." He laughed, surprised into it. "That would be cruelty," he said. "And you said we were done with that sort." "Not done," she corrected softly. "Clever with it." He bowed with his old show, his old half-sardonic grace. "Then I am yours again. Try not to fry me as a delicacy this time." "Don't earn it," she said, and they both smiled without showing teeth. The wedding was not grand. Daenerys said it would look like a treaty if it was too large and like a mistake if it was too small. They held it in the godswood that had grown like a stubborn thought in a city that didn't share that thought. The weirwood's face had been chiseled away long ago by someone who feared its eyes. A simple knot was tied. Jon's sisters stood near and far in their different ways. The vows were spare, as if the gods did not have time for poetry. The kiss was not the soft-bellied thing poets buy wellness from. It was an oath sealed with the heat of two people who had chosen and would keep choosing. Ghost watched from the trees and blinked his red eyes, and Drogon uncorked a slow thread of flame into the sky because even dragons have rituals. News came as news always does, in waves, some of it true and some of it not. A Sellsword prince raised a banner in the Stormlands and called himself the boy who had once been smuggled across the narrow sea. He had a pretty sword and a pretty story. The Reach sniffed and tried to decide if it liked his perfume. Daenerys sent a letter and a battalion, and the battalion beat the letter there because horses are faster than diplomats. The Sellsword prince bent at the knee before he could grow into a legend. In the Vale, some lords imagined that the Ares' height made their words heavier. Sansa wrote them a letter with very few words, and it shut them like a door. In Dorne, the woman in orange and gold announced that her people would stay out of a fight they had not been invited to, and then sent a fruit basket, because manners cost little and buy everything. The work of a realm is quieter than its killing. There were days when Daenerys woke with smoke in her mouth, and there were days she woke with the taste of apples instead. She stood out on balconies a great deal and learned that kings who walk the walls are not all showing off. Sometimes they are listening to the wind because the wind carries a city's gossip honestly. She had a law written that women could own property without men to hold it for them. She had a law written that freedmen could not be seized for old debts that had been burned with the papers that proved them. She had a law written that said a bell rung for surrender kept its worth as long as a soldier who heard it remembered its sound. That one cost her again and again, but she paid. Jon visited the north with her once in late autumn when the leaves had decided to set the world on fire in the way that does not kill anything and makes room for winter silence. The people did not cheer. They did not throw rotten vegetables either. They watched. Sansa embraced him and stood, polite as polished iron, in the sight of her queen, and said words that meant what they said without embellishment. Bran watched Daenerys with the gentleness of someone who knows a name in a language that has no letters. He said, "You will do." And the queen, who had crossed a world and destroyed a city's weapons and spared its children, laughed for the first time in days. On the ride back south, snow fell and melted on Drogon's hide, and Daenerys looked down at the long road unrolling ahead. "You set me on the throne," she said. "I took my hands off it when you sat," Jon said. "No," she said, and the wind pulled away the no and threw it back, and she did not mind. "You put your hands under it so when it tilted, because everything tilts, you could push it steadier. That is a different sort of thing. Men have thrown me onto chairs before. You are the first who wanted me to sit." He touched the scales near her boot and felt heat and the old heartbeat that was not a man's. "I wanted the realm to live," he said. "I know," she said. "I've met men with narrower reasons. I liked them less. In the Red Keep, the Iron Throne waited as it always had. Sometimes, late, when the day had been full of good work and also of stubborn fools, Daenerys would go into the hall alone and stand not too near. She would look at the jag of the seat, its angles and promises. Sometimes she would step closer, and the memory of snow in a hall where snow had never rightfully fallen would come and sit down beside her like an old ghost. She let it sit. Then she turned and walked away. The chair had waited so long, could learn to wait better. One evening in high summer, Tyrion came with a sheaf of papers and a face he wore when he expected to be told he had overstepped and intended to enjoy it anyway. "There is a thing we have not yet named," he said. "It has to do with how we end. Kings die, queens die. Sometimes they die in ways that are exciting, which is unfortunate for their subjects. If we mean to break wheels rather than making them squeal, we should decide who chooses next." She sat and rested her chin on her knuckles. "Elective? The lords will like it until they lose. Too much war. Some of the lords," he said dryly, "like war. It makes them feel tall. Or we can fix the succession in a different way. We can say the next ruler will be named by the one before her from among a handful of choices the council sets, and that the choice must be ratified by those same loud men and women, and that if there is no choice, the council chooses and we see who can count. If they do not like counting, they can burn the paper and take up swords and we begin the game again. I am tired of that game. It has too many rules and not enough wine. Write it," she said. "Not as an edict, as a story. People take stories into their beds. They hide laws in the ceiling." He smiled and rubbed his hands together, not because he was pleased to have work, but because work had turned out to be, against all expectation, a way to live with himself. On a winter's evening 3 years after the bells, a fire leaped in a pauper's hearth in Flea Bottom and scared a child and did not catch the roof. The child laughed. An old woman in the north told a story that made no dragons but did make brave children. In Dorne, the wind smelled of oranges again. In the Iron Islands, a girl watched the sea and wondered if it could be taught not to take everything. In the Riverlands, a miller's son learned to read his own name, and then his sister's, and then his queen's. In the Red Keep, Daenerys sat on a balcony and listened to the city breathe, and very softly, to the ghost of a bell. Jon came and stood beside her. He had grass in his hair where Ghost had rolled him into the dirt for his sins. He smelled of horse and clean sweat and leather, the honest odors of a day spent not in killing or in judgment, but in the sort of chores a man who is loved finds himself asked to do. "You look like you remembered something you had been trying to forget," he said. She turned the words over like a coin. "I did," she answered. "And then I forgot it again. On purpose. It's a luxury I am still learning I can afford." He took her hand then, a simple thing that did not ask for poetry. In the low sky, Drogon slept on a wall warm from the day, a dark curve that made the evening air smell faintly of smoke even when there was no smoke anywhere. Bells are not promises. They are only bells. But sometimes, when men keep the promises they hung on them, the sound lives on underneath everything else. A quiet, regular note that lets a city find its sleep. Far out beyond Old Town, on the edge of a world that had not finished being mapped, a small ship bore a girl with a face like winter sunlight over waters that did not know her. She stood at the prow and narrowed her eyes and smiled. There were no bells there at all. She meant to teach them how to ring.